Hi, my name is Michael J. Russ. Thank you so much for joining me for Beyond the 3D. Zero adversity is what my message is. And, I got to say, salt. There's a lot of misconceptions about salt. I run into people all the time. My own brother-in-law says, I'm not eating a lot of salt. I think when you're saying that, you're misinformed. You're eating the wrong kind of salt, because salt as a mineral is incredibly important to your body. Your body needs it. The problem I see is that people are out there working out, sweating, doing, whatever they're doing, inside, outside, playing sports. They're sweating out all these electrolytes and sweating all the salt out of their body, but they're not replenishing it with the right kind of salt. They're not replenishing their body. So what's happening is they're suffering from some sort of adversity. I think if not in the short term, in the long term. So I've got a gentleman with me today. His name is Daryl Brossard, and I got to say, I ran into him a number of years ago at a natural product show. I was so impressed with his product. I literally been using it ever since, and I've kind of branched off to using many more of their products as well. And Daryl is going to talk about salt, and he's going to talk about clay, and the other amazing products that Redmond Company is putting together. And you're going to see this stuff everywhere once you get this. And by the way, I've even had a doctor who is also an MD and a naturopathic doctor. He basically keeps a container, a bag of this salt in his office to show people what real salt looks like. And I'll tell you that in a little bit, because I've got his book, and I'll grab it and make sure that you see, because this guy is absolutely awesome as well. Now, Daryl Brossard, he's the business development officer for Redmond Company. Daryl, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, Michael. Thanks for having me on your show today.
Well, we're all about eliminating adversity. This is a huge cause of adversity for many, many, many people. I hate when I see people, downing these sport drinks like Propel and Gatorade and all these things that are really sugar and chemical laden and really aren't reneutralizing the body in a way that needs to be. Now, I'm going to tell you, we're going to talk about this first. This is your real salt that I've been using for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. And I love this stuff. And I'll tell you how I use it here in a little bit. But I want you to just give our audience an indication of, tell them how did you start in this business, and what is this salt all about? What makes it different?
Yeah, well, you've covered a lot of really important points already. And the first is this misconception around salt. People have heard on the news or from their doctor that salt's bad and they should eat less salt. Unless they're in kidney failure, I would suggest that probably isn't the best advice. And this is why. If you go to a hospital, the very first thing that doctor is going to do, generally, when you go to the hospital, the emergency room, is they're going to give you an IV of saline solution, which is salt water. And so it's not that salt's the problem, because you can be hooked up to an IV and get, gallons really of saline solution pumped through you in a extended hospital stay, and yet not overdose on sodium. And so it's not the salt that's the problem. It's all of the other chemicals and additives and things that are added to salt, and then also the foods that are heavily salted. A lot of the salty foods are things that are highly fat and highly fried and things that aren't healthy to begin with. And so it's not the salt that's the problem, it's the additives to the salt and the foods that salt's attached to. And so the reason of the way we got into the salt business was back in the 1950s. There was a drought here in Utah, which is where I'm from, and my grandfather and his brother had a farm in central Utah, and the farm wasn't doing that well. And so they knew there was salt under their farm. There was an outcropping of salt north and south of their farm, and so they dug down in the center of their farm, hit this salt vein, and started selling salt. Originally, they were selling it mostly for agriculture. We still do that. We sell salt for horses and for cows, and that was the original use of the salt, that and to salt roads here in Utah. And then years later, a nutritionist from back east came through and stopped in and saw our salt deposit, and he said, wow, this salt is amazing. Not only does it have the sodium chloride, but it has these other minerals and complex chlorides with the salt, and you really should be selling the salt into the health food markets. And we sat around and said, well, that sounds great, but what do we call this stuff? It's not processed salt, it's not fake salt, it's just real salt. And that's kind of how the name was born. And so now we have the brand. We've actually done a little rebrand since the package that you have. Now it looks a little bit more like this. And so we've kind of cleaned it up a little bit, still have the nice big window. But you can kind of see the new brand look versus the brand that you had there with your pouch. I need to send you a new one because we just barely kind of updated the look of those. And so when we entered the health food market, we were the first crystal salt on the market. Now, if you walk into a Whole Foods or a Natural Grocers, you'll see different Himalayan pink salts. Those all come out of Pakistan. There's some Bolivian pink salt that comes out of Bolivia. Mm-hmm. And then there's the real salt, which comes out of an ancient seabed in Utah. And you can see the pretty colors of that crystal. And that color, you can see the black, that's more manganese and zinc, and the reds are irons and iodines. And so there's just a whole variety of minerals that are trapped in the salt the way nature created it. Geologists tell us this salt was laid down during the Jurassic period. This is, eons ago, long before we had the pollution that we have in our oceans today. Unfortunately, water is the universal solvent. And so I'm teaching this to high school kids. We'll use the swimming pool example. And if you have a big swimming pool and you put dye in the one side of the swimming pool, it doesn't stay there. Eventually that dye will equalize through the entire pool. And unfortunately, our oceans are somewhat the same. The Exxon Valdez spill years ago has now moved all the way down the West Coast. We had the BP spill. Unfortunately, those big pollution in situations or events don't stay localized. We had the Japan disaster with the nuclear meltdown there in Japan after the tsunami. Those toxic exposure that happens to our oceans, they don't stay localized. So which is one advantage of a crystal salt that was laid down during the Jurassic era, long before we had some of these environmental toxins that man has introduced today.
That's absolutely awesome. And what makes it so interesting is the fact that, what caught me when we first had our conversation about sea salt, and I was taking some at that particular point, and the most popular is, Himalayan. Anything that's above ground is subject to the possibility of contamination. Now, to what degree, who knows? We're not testing that sort of thing, but really it's what drew me to Real Salt is just this incredible story of how it is from that period, the Jurassic period, and how in being mined, it's really as pure as salt really can be. I look at the sea salt production that goes on in Africa and in Asia and here in the United States. And heck, I live in Panama City Beach. They're producing sea salt from the water out here as well. And I look at it and I'm saying, well, wait a minute. What about the other minerals that haven't been captured in there? And what about the contaminants and the possible pollutants? Just because it's sea salt, so to speak, doesn't mean that it's like has all the nutrition and the value, electrolytes, etc., the minerals that you really need. So it's one of the reasons why I've been drawn to using your salt. Now, I will say this. When people say, oh yeah, I'm buying salt, listen, this is such an economical buy. Economics should have nothing to do with buying real salt. And I know that, when it comes to natural products and things, it can cost a lot more money, but I've had this, I bought this. This is the second one I bought in many years. And this is the finer salt. I don't have the kind that's coarse that you grind up in a grinder. But this lasts a long time. I mean, I'm not in sports, I'm not running, but it lasts a long time. So it's got some legs associated with it. And that's the other thing that I like about it. You create a large enough, I just basically put this in my own container. Basically, that's not true. I put it in the container, one of your containers that's sort of like this. I just keep refilling it. Now, what is it about? I got to tell you one thing here real quick. This is a book called Think Outside the Pillbox. Okay, it's by a doctor by the name of Ty Vincent, MD. He now lives in Hawaii. He used to live in, I think he lived in Alaska, and he does Zoom conferences. And I'm going to tell you this: therapeutic uses of salt. I'm going to read this because you're going to find this pretty amazing. He says, I suggest that my patients supplement with sea salt for several reasons. In my experience, most people's blood pressure decreases if they consume moderate amounts of real salt while avoiding table salt and processed foods with the unopposed sodium. And he says, after I read Dr. Brownstein's book and everything he wrote about, Dr. Brownstein wrote this book called Salt, Your Way to Health. Now, I think you might have heard of that about that. It's published in 2006. He says, after I read this book, I tried taking a half to 1 teaspoon of sea salt, and in commas, he says, I use Redmond salt in this book. This is awesome. Because this was, as you put it in this book, dissolved in 1 quart of water. I used to take my vitamins every morning. He says I had positive and surprising results. And that's a heck of an endorsement of your product. And like I said, he brings in, he goes, look, this is what salt is, and you can see the colors in this, the other minerals that you're talking about that actually have coalesced with this salt over time. And I think it's absolutely, to me, essential. Now, I told you beforehand how I use it, and I got to tell the story because there's so many people exercising. I live in an area that has high humidity, which means you sweat a lot when you do anything outside, especially when it's warm. And one of the issues that I had a few years ago, as I was redoing my front yard, I was taking happened to put 5 yards of dirt dumped in the driveway. I took it and I was wheelbarrowing it over to areas and spreading it out. And when I got done at the end of the day, I had a problem the first day, and I didn't really kind of realize this, but I actually got heat stroke. When I started to cramp up and I got dizzy and I fell down, and I was saying to myself, I was reaching into my mind going, what could I do to take care of this? I know I have a problem because I've lost too many nutrients, too many electrolytes, too much salt out of my body, too much water. I immediately made my way to the kitchen, almost crawling. I got a 10-ounce glass. I poured filtered water into it, and I put a half a teaspoon of this salt with something called Calm, which is magnesium supplementation. And I now use Remag, this other product that's pure liquid magnesium. And I stirred it up, and I drank 2 glasses. And within I would say under 2 minutes, all of the cramping had arrested. I'd put enough of electrolytes and nutrients, minerals back into my body where I had no issues. I basically went from this, I was really bad off, toes were cramping, legs were cramping, hands are cramping, it just arrested the entire situation. And what that got me doing was thinking about how I use this salt in my life and other, aside from emergency situations like that. I was a few moments away from calling 911. That's how bad I was. And this basically arrested the whole condition. But now when I go to play golf, when I go out for walks, when I go on vacation, I cannot go without this concoction. I don't go without it. Matter of fact, I was telling you, I have you sell these on your website. This little container of sea salt, the travel size, is so cool and just so convenient. I slip it into my pocket, and wherever I go to eat, I just take it out and I salt my own food. Now, I got to say something, and my explanation as to why this kind of salt reacts differently to the taste buds. This actually enhances the flavor of my food. Have you noticed that? And could you address that a bit?
Yeah, so you mentioned something earlier. You were saying, how sea salt has changed, or kind of the idea that, 30 years ago, if you went into a health food store and bought sea salt, or maybe 40 years ago, you would have been buying generally a clean product. But marketers realize that. So if you walk into a grocery store or health food store today and pick up a jar that's labeled sea salt, that sea salt may have more additives and more processing than the jar next to it that just says table salt, because the nature of salt's kind of changed. And so today I tell people, don't look for sea salt. You need to pick the label up and look for a natural, unprocessed, unrefined, because that not only affects the flavor, but also the health. But because you mentioned flavor, the reason that is so distinct and why real salt is almost a sweet salt flavor is because with salts, generally, a lot of salts, they've taken out some of the other minerals. So seawater occurs with magnesium chloride and calcium chloride and potassium chloride. Even here in Utah, the Great Salt Lake has a lot of magnesium and potassium chlorides. And a lot of these salt companies on the coast, they will pull out the magnesium chloride and they can sell it as a supplement. They can take out the potassium chloride and sell it for a de-icing product. And so they start changing the nature of the salt a little bit. And so that can also impact the way our bodies react to the minerals. For instance, ascorbic acid, which is part of the vitamin C complex, is really important for us. I would suggest that in an orange or in a citrus fruit, that ascorbic acid's in a form that may be more readily bioavailable than taking a tablet of refined, tabletized, pressurized ascorbic acid. And salt's kind of the same way. That's why in the hospital, an IV solution doesn't throw the body out of balance. But if that IV solution had all of these other additives in it, then it might. And when I say other additives, salt in nature is hygroscopic. Hygroscopic means it sucks moisture out of the air. So if we were in Florida or on the coast in the San Francisco Bay or the Gulf, if it's very humid, this crystal would be wet at the end of the day. It's actually sucking water out of the air. Because of that, when you put salt in a shaker, that sucking up of water can cause it to clump. And so back years ago, salt companies realized if they had a series of additives and heat to the product, they can avoid that clumping. Some of those additives are things like sodium silicoaluminate, or you'll see one that's called yellow prussiative soda. And so when you add those other chemicals to the salt, it displaces moisture. Well, that displacing of moisture is not healthy for the body that's trying to balance moisture just right. And so because of these additives that are added to salt, and if you grab almost any shaker of salt in a grocery store and flip the label over, you'll see an ingredient list on your salt. You shouldn't have an ingredient list on your salt. It should just say salt. But yet oftentimes there's all kinds of things added to the salt to either make it to look pretty or to flow smooth. Things like yellow prussiated soda, sodium calcialuminate, or sodium ferrocyanide is another one. And so these other additives are just not healthy for the body. Now, a question I also get asked a lot when it comes to salt is this question on iodine. Now, Dr. Brownstein, who mentioned his book, he wrote several books. One is called Salt Your Way to Health, and one is called Iodine, Why You Need It, Why You Can't Live Without It. And today, almost everybody is iodine deficient. And so they think that iodized salt is the best way to overcome that. Now, salt was never meant to be a source of iodine. Now, in natural salt, in this real salt here, if you flip the label over, there is about 10% of the daily recommended allowance of iodine in trace amounts in the salt.
Right, yeah, but not enough, not as much as you really need, right?
Right, but it's in a form that's much better for the body. And so I recommend that everybody should find great sources of iodine, be it kelp or seaweed. Dulse is a great source of iodine. And you need to get that, but salt is not the great place to get iodine, even though there's a trace amount, even in natural salt. That's absolutely amazing from
that simple perspective. I mean, I like to, in my view, you eliminated future adversity, present and future adversity by increasing your knowledge about the things that you use every day, that you eat every day, what you expose yourself to on a daily basis. Now, I got to tell you one little story. When I talk about the interesting thing of the way that traditional table salt, I'm a big popcorn nut. It's one of my vices. I have few, but that's one I just can't do without, And so obviously you put salt on popcorn, and when I eat big bowls of this stuff. So I decided I can't, I have to make a big bowl of it. You put regular table salt, the one that starts with an M, whatever. You put it on, and halfway through the bowl, your taste buds are numb. And you notice this too when you go to the movies and you eat half a bag of popcorn. All of a sudden, you get this burning on your tongue, and you've numbed your mouth just can't take any more of the salt. And there is no effect like that when I put your real salt on popcorn. The fine salt, it actually enhances the flavor of anything I put it on. Is there an explanation for that?
The only explanation is the way I would maybe describe it is if you have a fresh tomato out of your garden, that tomato has incredible flavor. If you get one that's out of season at the grocery store, it might be red, but it doesn't taste like that fresh, tomato. And similar, I know it's not quite the same with salt, but it kind of is, because the salt is that natural state, and these other minerals, these magnesium, manganese, selenium, zinc, copper, phosphorus, iodine, over 60 minerals that occur with the salt, those are sweet. And so it offsets that sodium burn, plus those other minerals really change the flavor profile. So much so that we actually we sell quite a bit of salt to Japan, and they use it in Japan for on chips and on foods, and because it's such a good salt. And the Japan market is very sensitive to quality products. But we actually had a Japan customer contact us, and we had to do all of these studies and send them to prove that we were not adding MSG to the salt.
Right, right. Which is, again, another additive.
Yeah, the salt was such a flavor enhancer that they assumed that there had to be MSG in the salt because of the way it boosted the flavor of these chips they were adding it to. And so it is something that a lot of people notice right out of the gate is, regardless of the lack of additives and the minerals that are there in trace amounts, it's the flavor that really drives. Once you try it because of the health, you'll use it continually because of the flavor.
Absolutely. Now you're a mountain biker, am I right?
Correct.
You're a mountain biker. Can you give our audience an idea of how you integrate your own salt into your mountain biking routine?
Yeah, so two ways. So whenever I go out and hit the trail, I always bring some salt capsules with me. And we used to manufacture some in a little veggie cap. We don't have those. We didn't really sell too many of them, but I still make my own with our salt, just a veggie cap. And so I'll take that with me. We've got little, like that little pocket shaker you had there. If I don't have the capsules, I'll have that in my bag when I'm riding. When I stop, I'll just, throw some of that salt down with the chaser. But for anybody that's, a soccer mom or just out doing yard work or roofing, I have a little sports drink that I recommend people make. And so the way I recommend they do that is start with a quart of super clean, fresh water. Now, you can have a whole show on water and, structured versus alkaline versus oxygenated. So I'm not going to get into that, but I just get the cleanest water I can find, spring water or whatever. So in 1 quart of water, add a 1/4 teaspoon of real salt per quart. So a 1/4 teaspoon of salt per quart of water, and then a squeeze of lemon. And then if you want a little bit of sweetness or maybe a little energy boost, you can put in a little honey in with that. I know some people like honey, some people don't. But if you were to take a quart of water, a 1/4 teaspoon of real salt, a squeeze of lemon, a little bit of honey, that is the best sports drink in my opinion. And it's pennies on the dollar compared to the purple or the pink or the orange stuff that you can get as a sports drink in the grocery store.
I think many sports moms are going to find that to be incredibly valuable. And again, especially here, I just came back from Cancun and we played golf down there, and I always take a Swell or a Yeti or one of those stainless steel containers with me that I can put some maybe some Evian water in or some filtered water of some kind, and I add the sea salt and I take it out, and because I know I'm going to perspire like crazy. And when you're on vacation, usually you don't have these things at your fingertips, and I purposely make sure that I bring either the little container or I put some in a larger bag. I make sure I put a teaspoon in there with it, have everything together. And I love the lemon or lime because I use that in the morning. Lemon and lime is sometimes just in hot water, and put a little sea salt in with that as well, and just drink that down. It's very I'm going to put it cleansing to your body. There are a lot of different things. Now, salt, I encourage people to basically go to your website, which give people your website. What's your website right now?
Yes, so we have for the salt, it's realsalt.com. Just REALSALT.com. And there you can find all the information on salt. In fact, right now, those little pocket shakers, we're doing kind of a trick or treat special for those that like to do that. Instead of handing out candy, all night long, you can hand these little guys out to your neighbor guests if they're trick or treating. And we're selling those. Typically, those sell for about $2, and you can refill them. It's like your chapstick. You can just keep it in your pocket wherever you go. But right now, you can get a box of I think you can get about 70 of those. A box of 70. For about $25 on the site right now. So really cheap if you want to stock up for hiking or backpacking or mountain biking or just sharing them with the neighbor kids as they come around.
I think that's an awesome concept. Now, you make some other products as well. I use some other things. Let's talk just a second. You do make some seasoned salts and some garlic salts and onion salts, things of that nature. Kind of describe why you kind of went into that aspect of things. That in the marketplace. And do you still do that?
Yeah, we still do have those. And the reason that we kind of started with that, if you look at the ingredient label on a lot of your seasoning salts, you'll see dextrose or sugar added often. You'll see other fillers, herbs and spices as well as salt do clump, and so they'll add different fillers in there. So we thought we could do the same thing without any of that, because the salt is sweeter. The salt itself almost has a sweet flavor, so we don't put any sugar in ours like some of the seasoning salts are out there.
Right.
And the garlic is just freeze-dried garlic and real salt, and the seasoning is a nice blend, kind of a celery salt blend. So that's the salt items we have. We have 4 different sizes of salt. We have the larger crystals you can put in a grinder, grind your own. We have a size, it's in our red packaging, called kosher. Kind of an interesting thing with kosher, there's 2 meanings of kosher. The first meaning of kosher is on the back of the shaker, there's these little symbols, and one of those, little there, it means that all of our salt has been certified as kosher by the Jewish community. There's no blessing or anything. A rabbi just walks through like a health inspector. Now, if you see kosher in the name of the salt, such as this one right here, what that is talking about the size of the crystal. And these crystals are a little bit larger, almost like you'd see on the top of a pretzel or a margarita rimmer. And a larger salt crystal will suck the blood out of meat better than a finer salt crystal. And so if you're making a strip steak and you're Jewish, you can't eat blood. Blood isn't kosher in the Jewish community, meaning it's not clean for Judaism.
Right.
And so by taking a larger salt crystal and caking that piece of meat, you will suck the blood out and make that meat kosher, which is why when you see kosher salt, it means the salt size that will suck the blood out faster. And so for pretzels, for margarita rimmers, for edamame, for meat rubs, that size known as koshering, whether it's kosher certified or not, that size is what means kosher. Then we also have the fine size, which is kind of the everyday salt size, your everyday table salt. And then we have a size, I got to send you some of this because you mentioned popcorn. This is our super fine. It's about the consistency of flour. And because of that, it really sticks well to chips and to popcorn and to almonds. And so it's a really fun size. It's also a size great for neti pots. And so I will send you some of that to experiment with for your popcorn cravings.
Okay, you're talking my language right now, man. I'm telling you. Because sometimes we'll make hand-cut fries, and I mean that's a perfect granular size for cooking and for putting on whatever it is you're putting on the table that requires a salt.
And not only that, with the finer the crystal, the saltier it tastes. And so you actually can use, if it's going on dry, like for popcorn or chips, you can actually use less salt and get even bigger flavor if the crystals are smaller.
I think that's amazing. Thank you for that piece of information. Now, there's one last thing that you all do, and I got to tell you something. When I travel, we travel around the world. I never travel without your Redmond clay. And I know this is a diversion from the salt. But this is one of the other amazing products that you make that I just want you to touch on for our audience. We could do a whole episode of this just on clay. But I'd like to know where it comes from, why you make it, and what is so good about this clay. I mean, I know I use it when just in advance, I'll tell our audience that I put it in when I travel. I put a little bit of it in the water bottle that I get out of my room or whatever. I'll shake it up and I'll drink that throughout the day. And it's good for my digestion. It's good for some other things. But tell me, why do you make? What is this, and why do you make it?
So again, we had a little packaging change, so you can see the difference in yours and mine. Kind of cleaned it up a little bit. And this is fairly new, so that's why it doesn't look like yours does right now.
That's okay.
When elephants get hurt, elephants rarely run to the vet. Elephants run to the mud, and they roll in the mud, and the mud dries and draws and pulls out thorns and thistles. And my grandmother years ago, and most people, if you go back a few generations, if you got stung by a bee, they tell you to put mud on it. Because when that mud dries, it draws and pulls and draws out, which is why every diva since Cleopatra has put clay on her face. And when that clay dries, it draws out impurities, and so it tightens the pores and cleans the skin. And so clay, we call it now the clay of 1,000 uses because, as you point out, there's so many ways to use clay. This clay deposit happens to occur right there near the salt deposit on my grandfather's farm. The early settlers used it. They said that the early natives had showed them how to use it when they first came into the valley, using it topically. And there's a great book on clay. It's called Our Earth, Our Cure. It was written by a French naturopath and was translated into English in the 70s. And in his book, he talks about all the ways he recommends using clay. Talks internal uses, external uses, all kinds of ways to use clay. And so that book was kind of our first introduction to a lot of the research on clay. And now on our label right now, this label here is focusing on just the external uses. You mentioned the internal uses of clay. There's a lot of clay supplements out there. We decided to just focus on the external with this jar, just so it seems like it's too good to be true to have all of those things that clay will do.
I understand.
So it's the same clay, the same process as your jar that we used to have the supplement panel on. This is just the external jar, but lots of great things on clay. The best site on clay, I think there's two good ones. One, if you go to Wikipedia and just search for medical clay, it brings up a good list. And I know Wikipedia is kind of truth by committee, so you can't take everything on Wikipedia as the gospel truth.
Yeah.
But there is a good list on that page of the research done on clay. NASA took clay to space with them back in the 60s for osteoporosis issues. There's been a lot of research on clay for MRSA and flesh-eating bacteria. And a lot of these studies on clay are on that Wikipedia page. So it's a great place to start. But like you said, you could spend a whole day on just talking about ways to use clay.
Yeah, well, I can tell people because I'm someone who's used your product for a long period of time, and I've used it for different things, and I have no issues when it comes to letting people know how I use it because I'm not a medical doctor and I don't have to be. However, I use clay. I mix it with the water because it has this way, and based on some resources that I've read, that clay has a way of binding with bad bacteria and other things in your gut. And if I ever get in a situation where I have an upset stomach, diarrhea, this is why I use it to travel, especially some of those countries where, the bacteria our bodies aren't used to are there, and it can cause a problem. Montezuma's revenge in Mexico, perhaps, or in some other country, Africa, wherever you are. Even, again, the mosquito bites, bug bites, other things that are there. It's always good to carry a Ziploc bag with your clay in it that I can turn into a poultice, or I can put it in something to drink. I can take a heavy dose of it if I get an upset stomach, and I feel better within a very, very short period of time when I do that, overnight. And, if you're on vacation for a number of days, a week, 10 days, or 2 weeks, being out of commission for 2-3 days is no fun. I mean, it's just, let's face it. So I had somebody tell me that what I should do is actually begin drinking it in my water a couple of days before I leave, so it was nice and so it was in my system already, so that it was already working for me, so that I would have my system would be much more acclimated to the possibility of something foreign that my body wasn't used to, and my body reacting as a result, and causing 2-3 days of my being out of commission. But I can tell you that I love it. You still make the first aid tube with the clay already ready to go?
We make one now. We had two of them that were identical. One was called First Aid and one was called Facial Mud.
Right.
We only make one now, and it's just the Facial Mud one.
Just Facial Mud?
One of the Facial Mud. So it's the same thing. You can use it on a bee, spider bite, or you can use it on a pimple or whatever. Yeah. Same as before. We just call it Facial Mud. And then one of the, we call it the clay of 1,000 uses. One of my favorite uses for clay is actually you can make your own toothpaste or tooth powder with good, clean clay.
Yes. Yes, I do. It's funny. I had it. I don't know what I did with it, but I had. I still have some earth paste left. Yes. Yeah. I have some earth paste left. I love the stuff. I love it.
So it's just super clean. It's just salt, clay, some water, some essential oil. We actually, on most of them, add some xylitol, which is a 5-carbon sugar that doesn't affect tooth decay. And then we also have one we call earth powder, which is basically the same thing. We just we don't add the water to it. So you can just get your toothbrush wet, dip it in. We have some with charcoal and some without charcoal in both the toothpaste and the tooth powder. Really fun products to try. And Michael, I need to get your updated address, and I'll send you an updated box. You can have the new look and the new package, and I'll drop some of the charcoal tooth powder in there for you as well.
Absolutely. And I hope that as our listeners and viewers have really gotten a lot of new knowledge out of this conversation, because salt is even as Ty Benson, MD, says, salt is one of the most misunderstood minerals out there on the planet. And, what we grew up with, what we're used to, really, and, then you start spreading all the thought viruses of how bad it is, and then people start staying away from it, and, your body then suffers. And most of the body's suffering is not short-term, it's long-term. It's long-term, kind of like the magnesium. Your heart is the biggest consumer of magnesium in the body. Your body needs the right kind of salt in order to function properly. And so I'm glad that you helped us understand, your salt, what makes it great. I love this stuff. I don't use anything but it on everything and anything. And I think I know for a fact that it makes everything I put it on taste so much better. And I'm happy to see that you got the 60 minerals. I think this is really the trace minerals. I think that's the major reason why when I use it to replace electrolytes in my body and put salt back in my body, that I do it in good quantities after exercising or whatever, and people are really into that now. And I see them doing it, and then I see them drinking just plain water. Nothing wrong with plain water. Good, put it back in your body, but let's give your body something that it can actually use to help you recover. Okay, so this has been an awesome. Yep. Go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned sweating and salt, and I'll just end with that. Our sweat is salt, our tears are salt, our urine is salt. No matter what water you drink, you're sweating out salt water. And so if you don't replace that, you can put yourself into a tailspin pretty quick. One other book that your listeners might be interested in, you mentioned a couple of great ones on salt. There's a new one that just recently came out. It was written just recently, and the book is called The Salt Fix. The Salt Fix. The author is James D. Nicolantonio, and he was recently on the Doctors, that TV program, and has been really well received. But it's a new fun book. Talks about the importance of salt and the misconceptions around salt. That if your listeners would like some more information, that's a good place to go. In addition to Dr. Brownstein's book, Salt Your Way to Health. I
think that's awesome. Again, it's your body, it's your health. If you don't, take responsibility for it, then it's your own fault, not only now, but way down the line when you turn almost 60 like me, and you're looking at, your body's not functioning the way that it needs to because of some of the consequences of the decisions you've made, years ago, decades ago. And we all want to have optimum health, not only when we're younger, but when we're older. And every choice you make, every decision you make about what you decide to put in your body really has a long-term consequence. So Daryl, I really do appreciate this you taking the time to get together with me and do an episode of Beyond the 3D and Zero Adversity to really help people understand salt and how your product and what makes it so awesome. And I thank you again. Again, please give out. Now you have a main website and you have is it Redmond.life?
Yep. So that's the main website, Redmond.life. You can see all the stuff, all of our products there, as well as kind of a little bit about us as a company. And then to just drill into the real salt side, the importance of natural salt, healthy salt, that's just realsalt.com. So Redmond.life, about living a great life. So Redmond.life.
I love it.
And boy, Michael, I sure appreciate you having me on. It's great to see you again, and look forward to bumping into you next time.
Definitely, my friend. And I look forward to trying some of that powder. Ooh, I want to try that powder very bad. I'll email my information to you. Thank you so much for being on. Enjoy life. Keep making some awesome products. And I just want to tell you that it's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. Okay?
Thanks, Michael.
All right, my friend. Take care of yourself.